Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. E te toi rani, e te toi nuku. Au mai rā ki roto i tō mātou huina, hei whakatō i te māriatana, o te māramatana o nā kaupapa, kei mua i a mātou, i roto i nā āniwa niwa o te wā, ui e, haumi e, tā i ki e. O thy supreme sky father, I thy supreme earth mother, instill your spiritual presence within our gathering this day, to implant thy pristine peace of understanding of thy highest order upon our aims and objectives that are presented before us within thy Rhombic coloration of time and a fork in the road, gathereth, embraceth, anointeth ye. Kia ora, pai a koe Otene.
Werohea ki papa tuanuku, werohea ki tai, he tuhi Māori kura ki te ao tūroa, turuturu a tai e rua o na tohu, he toroa he amakura, turuturu a uta he huia tana tohu, whakarongo ki te huia e tangi mai nā hui, huia. Huia ki runga, huia ki raro, huia ki roto, huia ki waho. Huia te here tangata e tā kia mai, mai Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pā māmao. Ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, ka ao, ka awatea a tihei mauri ora. Tihei mauri ora ki te pai ao ki te ao marama. No reira, tāmaki herenga waka, tāmaki whai rawa, tāmaki pai, mai mahurangi ki te mānukunuku o hoturoa. Kaipara moana, rere ata ki te waitamata, haere tonu ki ti kapa moana. E tai tumu, e tai pari, ki ngā mātarae o tāmaki, ki ngā mana, i ngā reo, rauranga tira mā o te motu nei, mai tāpiti, mai tata, te rei te mihi ki a kouka, nau mai, para mai, a whakatau mai. Tuatahe, ka mihi tonu ki tō tātou nei mata ni te rangi. Te timatanga me te whakaotinga ngā mea katoa. Nō reira, kororia ki tōna ingoa tapu. Tuarua ki te whare āriki o potatau te whenowheno te tuaputu. Ki a tātou nei kingi Māori kingi tuheitia. Me te kāhui āriki. Ka mihi tonu ka rākau ire hau pai Māori.
Pai Māori.
Uri anō ka rākau mākua whiturangitia. Rātau o ngā mate ngā aitua kai wainga nui a tēnā, o tēnā. Haere koutou, mui mai rā i roto taringa kaha o te atua. Nāna i homai, nāna i tango, whakamoi miti tia, ai hoa. No reira rātou, kia rātou. Te hunga mate ki te hunga mate. Haere. Moi mai rā. Te hunga ora ki te hunga ora. Kai a koutou. E huitahi nei. Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. Tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou. Ka huri. Greetings to all who are gathered today. I call to the birds of the sea, to the birds of the forest who have gathered here in Tamaki Makaurau. I welcome you, the chiefs, the orators, the leaders gathered here today. I welcome you once. I welcome you twice. I welcome you 3 times. I also acknowledge our Maori king, Kingi Tuheitia, and his family, the Kahuiariki. Blessings upon them today. But then I turn and remember those who we carry in our hearts and minds today, those who are no longer part of our world. And so to them, may they rest in peace. Go to that place that we call Hawaii Nui, Hawaii Roa, Hawaii Pāmama. But now I turn to you, those of us who are left behind, as we face the new challenges of this day. I greet you, welcome, welcome, 3 times welcome. My people of Ngāti Whātua have a saying, he aha te hau, e wa wara, e wa wara. He tiu he raki, he tiu he raki. Nāna ia mai te pūpū taraki I kiuta. E tiki nātu e au te kotu. Ko ia te pau whakairo kātū ki te waitemata I o kuwairangi e. What is this wind that blows from the northeast? And today it is you who are gathered here for this conference today. And so we welcome you in the same vein as we welcome those who come to Tamaki Makaurau. No reira, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, rauranga tirama, tēnā koutou, tūturu o whiti whakamaua kia tīna,
Tīna.
haumi e hui e,
Taiki e.
Tēnā koutou katoa, e ngā mana, e ngā iwi, e ngā rangatira, no mai, hari mai, whakatū mai. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, first of all, Richie and Otene, thank you for that fantastic start to our conference. I'm Margaret Devlin, the chair of the Infrastructure New Zealand Board, and on behalf of the board and our team, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you all here today. Our Prime Minister, ministers, members of Parliament, mayors, distinguished guests, INZ members, speakers, facilitators, and panelists to this year's Building Nations virtual event. Now, in the normal course of events, we would all be gathered today, right now in Wellington at the TSB Arena, looking forward to 2 days of engaging and insightful speakers with a fair amount of networking and catching up with old friends. COVID, of course, has presented us with a spanner in the works, or perhaps using today's theme, a fork in the road. Hopefully you like what I did there. So we did so well at selecting a theme for this year's Building Nations. It really was a relevant theme as we open our conference today. COVID, of course, I'm quite excited at the fact that we're getting into level 2 tomorrow, but more of that later. Going virtual was a brave but necessary call. If Building Nations was going to happen at all this year, it was really the only option. So instead of being together today, many of us have now graduated from the school of working remotely to the university of attending conferences virtually. Infrastructure New Zealand's key role is, of course, thought leadership in the infrastructure sector. Despite the different platform, we are confident the high caliber of speakers and the range of content of the programme over the next 4 days will reinforce Building Nations' place as the industry-leading event that it has always been. We hope it is truly a thought-provoking conference for you, and for all of us as a sector, we are keen to see the future success of New Zealand. I'm delighted to advise that as of yesterday, we had 733 registrations for the conference. So again, great to see that level of interest and support. Over the next few days, we'll hear from the Prime Minister, several government ministers, and several New Zealand and international experts. We'll have Q&A sessions and panel discussions, including hearing from a cross-section of cross-party spectrum of elected parliamentarians. It is an exciting lineup, and I hope it truly proves to be thought-provoking and will lead us towards new and better ways of thinking and doing for everyone's benefit. Delivering this event virtually has created an unenviable amount of extra work in a very short period of time. So my thanks to General Manager Claire Edmondson, the Infrastructure New Zealand team, and our provider, the conference company, for getting us to the starting line with the promise of an incredibly interesting and insightful 4 days ahead. I'd also like to thank our many sponsors, most of all our premium sponsor ANZ, for sticking with us when we made the decision to go virtual and continuing to support this event. We know our decision required our sponsors to make a choice, and we are grateful for your continued and ongoing support. I'd also like to thank our speakers, panelists, facilitators, and moderators in advance, all of whom are already giving up a huge amount of time to ensure that the technology, and this is where we cross all of our fingers, goes without a hitch and provides a seamless attendee experience for all of us. We do expect that you will be in and out of the conference, and we have structured a morning and afternoon session each day accordingly. The sessions will be recorded with the content remaining available online for the next 6 months. But I would say that's not an excuse for not listening today or for the next 3 days. Some quick housekeeping. We ask that in participating over the next 4 days, that you please direct your questions to speakers using the live Q&A function. Feel free to use the discussion forum to leave comments during the session. Also post updates in the event stream. And we also have a sponsor hub where attendees can meet with sponsors virtually. We will also be running a member poll. We're interested in your views on where we should focus our efforts, including existing work and potential new areas as we move into 2022 and beyond. This will help shape our efforts on advocacy and the events that we run. It's also an opportunity to provide us with any other feedback you may have. And I will be reporting on the poll results for the first time later today, and then later as the conference continues. And so to the fork in the road and setting the scene for our conference. We chose today's theme for Building Nations because we do believe that New Zealand infrastructure is at a critical juncture. Whilst not on the same scale as some of our infrastructure projects, the Infrastructure New Zealand team delivering Building Nations has provided a small but timely example of what's possible when you do get to the fork in the road, and you just have to get on with it, and get on with it we have. Of course, the team here had a clear task and a time frame. The sector is not in such an enviable position. The picture is still developing, and the challenges to our sector are significant. Climate change, emission reduction, sustainability, funding and finance, diversity, major government initiatives that are still in progress, 3 Waters, the Local Government Review, and the Resource Management Review among them. On their own, they are each considerable government work streams, but they are all ongoing and of particular interest to our sector. So we await the outcomes of this work with particular interest. We also have a massive infrastructure deficit to address. just to achieve a sufficiently resilient infrastructure network fit for the future challenges that New Zealand will face. Some of our key infrastructure is in bad shape, with a need to fix it that is only becoming ever more urgent. We need to deliver and use our key infrastructure more effectively, efficiently and sustainably, both in the construction and operation, as well as future-proofing for new and emerging technology. And as ever, somebody has to pay for this, and funding has to be a key element, and especially so in these days of post-COVID debt. The appetite for public-private partnerships has for years been an ongoing conversation, but an increasingly important one. Our current government has signalled that PPPs are not an option except for a few select areas such as transport. But there is plenty that needs funding. The government can't fund all of it and needs to work with the private sector to make it easier to invest in infrastructure. It could also do much more to streamline procurement and be easier to deal with. These and other issues, including those who are yet to emerge, will all change how we go about our business and how we deliver our outputs for the good of New Zealand. And change we must. The New Zealand Infrastructure Plan is encouraging. A plan is always a good start, but it also highlights the challenges ahead and the need for increasing urgent action. Infrastructure New Zealand will hold the government and the Infrastructure Commission, Te Waihanga, to account to ensure that it delivers on this vital strategy. New Zealand will face difficult choices, just as our sector grapples with its own challenges. We can prioritise projects and prepare for them, but we need a system that provides certainty, enables forward thinking, drives efficiency and smarter ways of getting things done without driving up costs. Like other sectors, we've had challenges from COVID lockdowns and border closure. We face increasing costs and supply chain issues and significant challenges in retaining skills that we do have in the face of significantly higher salaries being paid in Australia and further offshore. This is a particular challenge when, as a sector, we need skills that we don't readily provide much training for in New Zealand. We also need greater diversity of thought and experience, with much to learn and benefit from both. We also need to provide opportunities to our young people and train them in skills that will provide them with clear pathways and a sector with a strong future. We need the best thinking, innovation and technology and expertise that we can muster, and we need a system that lets us get on with it. So here we are at a fork in the road. It's a call to action that embraces change and opportunity, and I hope you will enjoy the next 4 days. As we navigate our way through COVID, I've heard a lot of comments about the fact that there is no rule book or that the rule book has run out. The counterfactual to that, of course, is that leadership is what's needed when the rule book runs out. We have a choice to shine or be left behind. As we start to explore that opportunity, we begin this morning's session with Antonia Watson, Chief Executive of our Premier Sponsor, ANZ, and a ministerial address from the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern. We will then focus a little bit on COVID-19 with Professor Ian Goldin. He's Professor of Globalisation and Development at Oxford University, who will be followed by the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, amongst many portfolios, the Honourable Robertson, and there will be an opportunity for Q&A after that session. After a short break, we will hear from the University of Auckland Associate Professor Dr. Susie Wiles on New Zealand's COVID-19 public health response, again followed by a Q&A session facilitated by INZ Board Member Graham Mitchell. It's my very great pleasure now to introduce Antonia Watson. Antonia is Chief Executive Officer, ANZ New Zealand Limited. She has over 25 years' experience in professional services and financial services sector, in New Zealand, the United Kingdom, Australia and Hungary. Antonia is responsible for overseeing the running of ANZ Bank NZ Limited, which includes the network of retail branches, contact centres and banking specialists who take care of over 2 million customers and business customers. Prior to accepting this role, Antonia was Managing Director of Retail and Business Banking. Antonia joined ANZ from Morgan Stanley, where she was General Manager of their business services and technology centres in Budapest and held various finance roles in Sydney and London. She is a qualified accountant from KPMG and has a Bachelor of Commerce with honours from the University of Otago. Antonia, the floor is yours.
Inga mana, ina waka, inga reo, ero rangatira ma, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Infrastructure New Zealand conference. As you've heard, I'm Antonia Watson, the CEO of ANZ Bank New Zealand, and it's wonderful to see you all, albeit virtually, this morning. Firstly, I'd like to thank Margaret Devlin and her team at Infrastructure New Zealand for providing this forum for us today. If a reminder was ever needed, the COVID-19 pandemic has put a clear focus on the vital role infrastructure plays in our modern world. Today's conference and the ability of many of us to keep working during the pandemic, for example, owes a lot to the significant investments successive governments made in New Zealand's broadband infrastructure. At ANZ, it's our pleasure to again be premier sponsorship of today's conference. We're very proud of our long involvement with some of New Zealand's largest public and private sector infrastructure projects, providing and connecting the capital flows from domestic and international parties. I'm particularly proud of some of the recent projects we've been involved in that address social needs, such as our work with community housing providers to increase much needed quality housing stock across Auckland. And with the need for the country to urgently scale up renewable energy generation, we developed an innovative funding solution for Top Energy's new geothermal power station at Ngāwha in the far north. So today's discussions come at a critical time. Across the world, infrastructure is being placed at the centre of efforts to build back better and revitalise economies in the aftermath of COVID-19. In New Zealand, the government has committed to significant infrastructure investments over the next 4 years, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing the Prime Minister's insights on that shortly. In addition to delivering services and improving wellbeing, economies worldwide are looking at how lower carbon infrastructure solutions can help them transition to a greener future. There's also the need to find smarter ways to prioritise spending and procure infrastructure funding, and how to deliver the projects more sustainably and efficiently from a resources and labour point of view. In the years ahead, banks will be a key driver of changes that minimise climate impact. New regulations will require banks like us to lead emissions reductions through disclosing our climate risks and financing decisions. This will fundamentally change the risk appetite of the financial sector and encourage us to raise risk thresholds for new green investments. The result will be accelerated investment in greener business models and greener technologies. It's very exciting for us at ANZ to be part of this transformation. As they say, where the funds go, the future goes. As the theme of today's conference highlights, we're at a fork in the road in so many ways, and COVID's added to the complexity. What will the next normal be, and will its infrastructure and public sector needs need to be different to before? What funding will be available, and what will success look like? The answers to these questions will require some inspired thinking, which is why we're all here at this conference. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
Koutou katoa. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to join you virtually for the Building Nations Symposium 2021. During last year's events, I spoke of the reality that COVID would be with us for some time, and that our recovery and rebuild would need to be concurrent. From the vantage point of the present, I can say that our focus and our resolve have not changed. Infrastructure is vital to the well-being of Aotearoa, and I'd like to thank everyone in attendance today for the work you have done to support this. The substantial progress we've seen in the past year, despite the ongoing challenges of the pandemic, is testament to your vision, commitment and resilience. Construction has continued at pace across the country. We recognise that labour shortages have posed challenges in some sectors, and we're working to address this with adjustments to immigration settings and programs to empower and upskill people in the labour market. The government is also committed to working with you to future-proof our infrastructure. We're investing in projects across New Zealand to create jobs, boost our economy and ensure our communities are great places to live. Over the next 5 years, we'll be investing $57.3 billion in infrastructure to continue driving our recovery. We're committed to ensuring that the impact of our spending is felt right across New Zealand. Since coming into government, we've already invested more than $2 billion into our regional infrastructure. This will ensure our regional rail networks, water systems and healthcare centres are fit for purpose and that they run on cleaner energy. We've also made changes to increase housing supply, and it's rewarding to see that new houses are being built at record levels. We are already building back better thanks to your efforts, and there's more work to do. We're cognizant that this work will require a skilled, sizable workforce. I'm proud that more than 144,000 people have so far taken up our free trade training initiative and free apprenticeships. Of course, the health of that wider infrastructure we all live in, though, will be our natural environment, and it's essential to our continued well-being. That's why this symposium's theme, A Fork in the Road, is so important, with the opportunity now to ensure that as we rebuild in the face of COVID, we also address the other big issues facing our country, like climate change. Now is the time to prepare for and invest in a future New Zealand that we can continue to be proud to call home. I'd like to thank you all once again for the incredibly hard work you've done over the past year in the face of some very tough challenges. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and thank you, Antonia, for your comments as well. COVID-19 will likely be one of the milestones in all of our lives, whether we catch it or not. The global disruption and the changes it has required from all of us has changed the way we work, the way we behave, and even the way we think. How we move on from a global pandemic and live with COVID in the new normal is increasingly coming to the fore, and indeed we're seeing that over the last couple of days around decisions about mandatory vaccinations. Our keynote speaker on COVID-19 in the international environment is Professor Ian Goldin. He has an impressive CV. Ian is Professor of Globalisation and Development at the University of Oxford, Professorial Fellow at Balliol College, Oxford University, and from 2006 to 2016 was the founding director of Oxford University's interdisciplinary Oxford Martin School. He currently leads the Oxford Martin research programmes on technological and economic change, future of work and future of development. From 2001 to 2006, Ian was Vice President of the World Bank and the group's Director of Policy and Special Representative at the United Nations. From 1996 to 2001, he was economic advisor, to President Mandela and the Chief Executive of the Development Bank of Southern Africa, transforming it to becoming the largest investor in infrastructure at over 500 municipalities in the 14 countries of South Africa. Previously, Ian served as Principal Economist at EDBR and the Director of Programmes at OECD Development Centre. He has an MSc from the London School of Economics and an MA and doctorate from the University of Oxford. As I said, a very impressive CV. We'll follow Ian's address with Q&A, but for now, I'll hand over to Ian. Welcome.
It's a great pleasure to be able to participate in Infrastructure New Zealand's conference, and I really do regret that I can't be with you, but I'm sure you'll understand the circumstances that prevent this. We're in an extraordinary time in world history, in the evolution of New Zealand and other countries' histories, and of course, the implications for infrastructure are profound. What the pandemic has done is compress time. It's brought into the period of a couple of years events that would have taken 10 or longer years to emerge. And although things seem to be perhaps moving very slowly at times, underlying this are real profound seismic shifts. And it's those seismic shifts that I want to talk about and think through the implications for New Zealand. What's happened in this pandemic is a number of major shifts. Clearly, the pandemic itself was a manifestation of what I've called the butterfly defect of globalization. The ability of globalization not only to spread great things, to vastly improve our lives in multiple ways, but also to be a very dangerous force, a force that spreads not only pandemics, but also cyber attacks, cascading financial crises, and through the unintended consequences of the goods can lead to bads. For example, it's wonderful that 1.5 billion people in the world have received energy and are climbing the energy curve for the first time. But this is leading to an escalation of climate change. It's wonderful that another 500 million people have got access to antibiotics for the first time over the last 30 years. And yet this is leading to a real danger of antibiotic resistance. Good things can lead to bad. Our connectivity, which spreads so much good, can pose new threats to us. Our airport hubs become the vectors of pandemics, which is, of course, why New Zealand has tried to seal itself off. Our financial centers can be the locus of cascading financial crises. And our cyber connectivity, indeed, my speaking to you today, could be a source of cyber viruses spreading. And so we need to manage globalization more effectively. For me, globalization is flows across national borders of goods, of services, of finance, of people, and most significantly of ideas. And it's that, and the acceleration of that since about 1990, with the Berlin Wall coming down, the Uruguay round of trade negotiations, the Maastricht Treaty, which led to the unification of the markets within Europe, the opening up of China, NAFTA in North America, the reduction in capital controls, that has led to the more rapid progress in incomes and in many other respects around the world. It's been the period of the most rapid acceleration in livelihoods. Poverty has come down more quickly than in history. But now we're seeing the one great failure of globalization, which is this disconnect between increasing connectivity and our political systems, which remain national, caught in a Westphalian model where countries are trying to do it for themselves. And it's that disconnect between the globalization of systems, the flows that bring so many goods, including the vaccines we need, and the ideas that keep us safe, like wearing masks and being vaccinated. While that is all accelerating, politics remains stuck in a previous era. And so the question is, can we work together? Can we cooperate to meet these great challenges that we face collectively? Be they climate change, be they the pandemic, be they financial crises, or others. And it's not everyone that needs to cooperate, because most problems are caused by a small number of countries or a small number of companies. In fact, the Pareto principle, where 20% of the actors can solve 80% of the problems, applies to most global problems. And yet what we're seeing with this pandemic is that some problems can arise anywhere. The poorest place in the poorest city, or a rich lab in a rich country. And so it becomes imperative, particularly when we're thinking about pandemics, to work together. And because this pandemic will stay alive until we stop it everywhere, global vaccination is absolutely vital too. Now, because this pandemic has led to such an extraordinary global compression of circumstances, everyone experiencing the same thing for the first time in history, It's also leading to dramatic shifts in adoption rates of new behaviors. What seemed absolutely impossible in January of 2020 is now commonplace. If the New Zealand government had said to everyone, you can't fly or you've got to stay at home in January 2020, it would have been politically totally unacceptable. But now, of course, it makes sense. Similarly, if governments had said to us in January 2020, we're just going to print money, as the rich countries have done, $20 trillion US dollars of it, we would have thought they were left-wing extremists. Now conservative governments around the world, not least in the UK, are doing it. And so we've seen an ability to change our actions, our behaviors, and that, for me, is a source of hope, because it tells us we can do things differently if we need to. Because the pandemic has had such a differential impact, because governments around the world have behaved so differently, we've seen very different mortality rates and very different economic impacts of the pandemic. Some places, including New Zealand, have done very well. They've been able to have very low mortality rates and keep their economies afloat. Not surprisingly, many of these are governments led by women. And yet, some big governments have done spectacularly badly, the US and the UK amongst them. Some democracies have done very well, New Zealand and a number of others, and some have done very badly, the US, Brazil, UK amongst them. Some autocracies have done very badly, Russia, Turkey amongst them. And some have done, I think, well under the circumstances, like China, Singapore. And so we need to look at what governments do and how they respond. But because of this, what we're also seeing is a rapid change in the economic center of gravity, because some countries have suffered a much more severe recession. And that severe recession, although there's a rebound now, has permanent scarring. The UK is likely to be 2% smaller next year than it would have been without the pandemic. In fact, Brexit has had a bigger impact on the UK, so we'll be about 4% smaller. But relatively robust responses in Southeast Asia have meant that that region did not suffer the losses. In fact, China grew during 2020. It was one of the very few countries, along with Ireland, to have grown robustly. And this year will grow not as high as it would have grown without the pandemic and the enforced lockdowns, the trade restrictions, etc., but it will nevertheless grow. And with this, although China was already emerging as the largest economy in the world, that has accelerated. By 2040, we're going to be in a world where China most probably accounts for about 18% of the global economy. India, which had a terrible pandemic last year, contracting by about 8%, rebounding strongly this year. India accounting for about 15%. The US about 12%. So US, the third largest economy by 2040, no longer primary. And Europe combined about 10%. When you think about this, and the other countries of Southeast Asia as well, South Asia, with India very big, but Indonesia becoming very significant, probably the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world by 2040. Vietnam and other countries doing well too. The global center of gravity moves to north of New Zealand. And in that process, the trade opportunities change too. But it's not just that where economic activity is moving from the Atlantic focus to the Pacific and Indian, but also that the composition of economic activity is changing in dramatic ways. The composition is changing to become much more services. Societies are aging around the world, except for in Africa. And with that, and with higher levels of income, a greater and greater share of activity will be spent not on atoms, but on bits, not things, but digital and other, and services like care, like education, like travel and tourism. And so less stuff coming out of the ground. And of course, climate change and concerns on natural resources are compressing that as well. More to a circular economy, recycling, and more to what people do and machines don't do. We're seeing a radical change in the nature of globalization, away from a system which was in many ways designed to take advantage of low-cost labor around the world and low-cost resources around the world, to a system which increasingly will not be focused on that, because repetitive rules-based manufacturing tasks and even service tasks like call centers, the back offices of financial institutions, insurance, legal and other, will be done by machines. Anything that's repetitive and rules-based will, over the coming decades, be increasingly done by machines. And of course, machines are cheaper generally because capital is cheaper in the advanced economies than in poor economies. So the competitive advantage of poor economies rapidly eroded by technological change. Big question, of course, is where will the 100 million people in the workforce in Africa coming onto the labor market over the next 10 years in Africa get their jobs from? But for other countries which have a comparative advantage in skilled and educated people, like New Zealand, this could be highly beneficial. And of course, New Zealand does not only have skilled and educated people, but it is a wonderfully beautiful place. It's a tranquil place. It's a place where people will want to be, not only for travel and tourism, but for care and education and other things which are growing in significance. And so New Zealand is in a sweet spot in the future. New Zealand is in a place which will allow it to take advantage of its geographical proximity, not least to the Eastern Hemisphere, but also its remarkably beautiful and tranquil environment and highly skilled workforce. And so when one begins to think about what the implications are for infrastructure, they are significant. New Zealand has done a remarkable job. And I've been looking at the program of investment, which you've published on your websites over the next 5-6 years to upgrade water, transport, digital, and other infrastructure. And this is vital. There will also be, as part of this globally, and no doubt in New Zealand too, a new commitment to the transition to net zero. COP26 is closing, coming to an end. Many promises, many hopes, but also, I think, a real sense of this is not good enough. More needs to be done more urgently by more players, particularly the key countries that are accounting for greenhouse gas emissions, the key companies that are accounting for that. But this transition to net zero is going to happen. And that is also going to change many comparative advantages in infrastructure, in raw materials. Your neighbor Australia will have to work this through, I believe, more urgently than it is. But the transition to new infrastructure for energy will bring with it pressures on grids, as well as, of course, on storage as absolutely central. And a variety of different sources for energy become important because of the intermittency of many renewable resources, wind, solar, and others. Greater reliance on tidal becomes an option, as well as hydro, of course, storage through grid, movement across a long stretch of land like New Zealand is provides more optionality on that. But it also, I believe, in the medium term, creates opportunities for much cheaper energy and for a rethinking about the use of space. When busy downtown intersections are no longer noisy and polluted, they become places where people will want to increasingly be. Much has been written, and I've been doing a lot of work on what this all means for the future of offices. What does it mean for the future of work and cities? And I believe Australia is not going, New Zealand is not going to suffer from the sorts of pressures that we're seeing in London and New York, which have really been quite devastating and pose big questions for the future of our great cities in Europe and in North America. And I think this will also be posed in some other places. The consensus appears to be emerging that people do have to work together physically, that there is no substitute for some time together for creativity, and because all jobs are basically apprenticeships. People learn by observation, by doing, and virtual isn't a total substitute for that. However, there will be an internationalization, a new globalization of professional services. If you can work remotely from your suburban home, why not engage someone that's going to work remotely from New Zealand? Or why doesn't that person move to New Zealand, which might be a much more pleasant environment than where they work? And so I think there will be a great incentive for people to both move to countries like New Zealand, but also for international services to use remote services from New Zealand, legal services, architectural services, and many others can be done remotely, as we've seen. And we're moving to a world in which even many medical activities can be done remotely. I, for example, do consultations with my GP remotely. There's no reason why that person couldn't be in another jurisdiction. And so great new possibilities emerge when you have educated workforces, where you have skills, and of course, where you have people speak the same language and are familiar with the norms and ways of doing things. But my sense is that the big next wave in globalization is going to be the globalization of professional services. All of this adds up to a series of remarkable opportunities for New Zealand. First, of course, you need to get through the situation you're in currently, and far from me to speak about how that's going to work, but I know it's a subject of great focus, the opening up of New Zealand, and my friends are delighted who are able to go back for the first time in a long time. But in the medium term, what this adds up to, I believe, is thriving opportunity. And with that, the need to continually invest in infrastructure. We're going through a period which I think will remain for the time being of low interest rates and big opportunities for infrastructure. Along with aging and the demographics comes a need for pension funds to invest in reliable, sustainable investments which give returns above those of fixed income. Infrastructure investment and public-private partnerships provide such an opportunity with long-term assets which match the long-term liabilities. And so these pension funds increasingly are focused globally, creating a bigger and bigger pool of investable funds. Together with new ways of structuring, the creation of systems which allow you to take out some of the risk, and of course, the significance of domestic pools of savings, which want returns as well, ordinary investors. So private investment in infrastructure, is increasing globally, and New Zealand provides a remarkably safe, politically not risky opportunity compared to many of the others that the pension funds globally are looking at. At the same time, it's not only the need for a growing population, an aging population that needs to be taken into consideration, but the need to do things differently. The need to totally transform to a net zero well before 2050. The need to have an infrastructure which caters for a different sort of economic activity, much more services, much more focused on sustainability, and of course, the nature of where people are changing as well, with greater emphasis on remote work and on distributed networks across the country. All of this adds up to a wonderfully exciting time and a positive time for the future of infrastructure in New Zealand. We are going through a very, very difficult period in world history, and many individuals have suffered dramatically as a result of this terrible pandemic. Risk is integral to development. The more we connect, the more we are interdependent, whether it's within our countries or globally. We need to build this resilience, and one builds it by having the capacity, including the spare capacity, within systems. Not investing is the only sure way to ensure that one heads backwards and that one is not resistant. In the medium term, I believe that New Zealand will be more integrated in the global economy. More opportunities will arise. And with that, as infrastructure as the foundation core, it will create a more prosperous, thriving, and more resilient society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian, for that very insightful and thought-provoking presentation. We are moving to Q&A. Could I ask, just as I said earlier, if you do have questions, can you please post them to the live Q&A icon on the screens? Thank you. Ian, perhaps I could kick off with a couple of questions. I guess, reflecting on what I've heard from your presentation, there may well be a danger that economies and jurisdictions take a very risk-averse approach and lock down and basically look after themselves and forget about the international position or the globalization. Any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly many economies are doing that. You know, China's done it and New Zealand's doing it. And it's very understandable why. And obviously your mortality rates, as in China, are extremely low. But it's not sustainable. You know, I think all countries benefit from integration. New Zealand would not be what it is if it hadn't been part of the globalized world. It was always a key member of an open trading system. Historically, I believe it will be again. This is a really exceptional time. So the question really is just how do you get there? And already it's playing its part. The good thing, you know, is that despite the lockdown, it's not withdrawing politically globally. So we saw this in COP, a very active role for New Zealand, for example. We're seeing it in other spheres. But it's why integrate, and also declares itself open for business, for finance, for investment, for tourism, travel, and of course it needs skilled people rather desperately in many areas as well. So my sense is that as soon as vaccination rates go high enough, and I've been looking at your vaccination rates, they're really very similar to many European countries on double vaccination. My sense is that this is going to be what the next 6 months bring, is reintegration. And I'm sure many people will welcome that. Certainly the global community will. Yes,
absolutely. I'm looking forward to that day. A couple of questions coming through from those attending. There's a lot of talk about the Great Resignation. I don't know whether you've seen that in the UK. How do you see this playing out?
I think the numbers do suggest that a lot of people have either left their jobs, not going back to jobs. Talking about in the US, something like a quarter of people not going back to jobs they had before the pandemic. There always is churn, but it tends to be much lower levels than this, which is why people are calling it the. I think there are two different things happening here. One is pandemic has given people a real opportunity to think about what they want to do with their lives. There's a real reassessment. Many people prefer the work-life balance they've achieved. Many people have decided to do other things, and there's a real fear amongst many people of going back to crowded, congested places. If you're not everyone can work remotely. So a lot of people who are not going back to work are not the remote workers, but people that have to go back to essential services, people that have to be on crowded commuting, transport, and who are putting themselves in danger whenever they go to work. And it's not surprising that people are resigning. But I also think that it's too early to say. We've got this paradox of, in many countries, of very high unemployment rates. For example, there's 13% youth unemployment in the UK at the moment, and massive skill shortages. And this is true in the US as well, where we have this, and it's partly about spatial geography. The new jobs are being created in different places to where the old jobs were. And as what the pandemic has done, as I indicated in my talk, in many spheres, is it's accelerated the transformation of economies. So it's killed old jobs and created new jobs. And there's a lot of new jobs, for example, delivery and many other things that are happening. And people are in the wrong places for them, basically. Sometimes they have the wrong skills for them. I think this will adjust. I think over a year or two, people will move. They'll get the skills to become delivery drivers, etc. And we'll see a catch up in that. But clearly what the pandemic's done is it's accelerated, it's compressed time, it's accelerated transformations that would have taken much longer to emerge. I also think as we begin to see the tail end of the pandemic, and that's when vaccination rates go into the 80s, 80% plus, I think people will feel more comfortable about going back onto public transport. And we'll see people going back to many of the jobs that they're reluctant to go to now.
Great, thank you. Quite a lot of questions coming in now, so forgive me, I'll just read them out directly. One that's getting a lot of ticks, so obviously interested in your comments. Nationalism has been a key global force. Do you think that we can get over that and work collaboratively enough to resolve our key international issues? So I guess it's more, I guess you reflect on COP, where we had a lot of, I think we might have lost Ian, have we? As I started in my speech this morning saying technology may give us some issues. We have lost Ian at the moment, trying to get him back on. But in the meantime, we are going to move to the poll, and Katrina's going to make that live now. Katrina, is that right? So please, everyone vote, and just reminding you, this is around what are the priorities for Infrastructure New Zealand. About a minute, I think, for running that. Thank you. Thank you all for your contribution to the poll voting. Top 3 at the moment are addressing the infrastructure deficit and how will it be funded and financed. I guess no surprise there. In second place is climate change and the role of sustainable infrastructure to mitigate impacts. And in third place, attracting talent and retaining skills. So we'll keep running this poll throughout the conference, and then we'll land on what our top priorities are. So thank you all for contributing so far to that. Ian, welcome back from the world of cyber.
Yeah, this is the downside of remote work.
Absolutely. So Ian, the question really was, how do we ensure that we don't become too insular, that the national priorities are given more priority than working as part of the international sector?
Yeah, I think every country needs to do both. You can't thrive as a country unless you look after yourselves, but you also can't thrive as a country if the world is blowing up, if you don't have global growth to trade with, or if you don't have people coming, if the geopolitical tensions, escalating climate change, pandemics, these are all global problems which require coordination to resolve. And so the idea that you can build a wall, no matter how high it is, and somehow thrive is one of the great wrong-headed ideas. The only country that's really tried to isolate itself is North Korea. And that's not a place that anyone, I think, would like to emulate. You basically get locked into the past. You don't evolve with the rest of the world. And so it's absolutely essential that one is part of that and part of the problem solving, because without that, the world will be very, very unstable.
Thank you. Another question that's getting a lot of support is, if the pandemic doesn't end in 2022, what does this mean for globalization?
This pandemic's going to be with us beyond 2022. I'm sorry to disappoint the questioner. It's just a question of whether it's manageable, whether it becomes like a flu or a low-grade virus that we have a constantly evolving vaccine that can deal with. We have high enough vaccination uptake. So like a flu vaccine, we cope with it. I think it's going to take a very long time to totally disappear. And certainly with Africa only being double vaccinated at 6%, the real threat is not so much this pandemic, but mutations of it becoming virulent in the future we don't have the vaccines for. Globalization has not slowed down because of the pandemic. In fact, I think there's an acceleration of many aspects of globalization. Digital, this digital connectivity is one manifestation of it. Financial globalization is very robust. We have record merger and acquisition. If you look at shipping rates and container rates, you see that they're higher than ever. There are many aspects of globalization that are doing very well. Of course, science is doing well. The vaccine itself is an aspect of globalization. Unfortunately, some of the bad stuff's also doing really well, like the fake news and the spreading of very bad ideas globally. So globalization is constantly evolving, and some aspects are slower, but a lot of what's happening on supply chains, a lot of what's happening in the transformation of economies would have happened over a much longer period of time. It's been accelerated and brought into the present. So I'm optimistic that globalization will continue, and that what we need to do is try and make sure it's more balanced, and that we manage the bads of globalization as well as the goods.
Great, thank you. A couple of sort of similar themes coming through, which is, how vulnerable is the recovery in the face of record borrowings, or in the case of governments printed money? How do you see that playing out as part of this recovery?
Well, one of the reasons that globalization has been robust, and we're seeing these extraordinary shipping rates and oil prices, is because of $20 trillion of stimulus. Now, that's by far the biggest stimulus the world's ever known. It's the size of the US economy basically being thrown at particularly the rich economies. Poor economies haven't afforded stimulus. That's created a massive debt burden. It's affordable because interest rates are so low. In fact, the cost of borrowing in the UK now is lower than it was 3 years ago, even though debt has increased by a very significant amount, 40% or something. The big question is, will these shortages in supply chains, in labor, and in other areas, will this consumption bubble lead to inflation? If it does, then interest rates will go up and we get into a very dangerous cycle. So my own view is that this is short term. The stimulus is being withdrawn. We're already seeing the rollback in Europe, in the US, and in many other economies of stimulus packages. And a key question is the stimulus being spent on consumption or investment? My own view is that too much is consumption and not enough investment. It needs to go into infrastructure and the energy transition to net zero. It needs to go into education. It needs to go into health infrastructure. When it's spent on those things, it improves the foundations of growth and leads to higher growth rates and makes repaying the debt more affordable. When it goes into consumption bubbles, that's when you start worrying. That's what happened a century ago in the roaring 20s. Growing inequality, consumption bubbles, and the rest is history. That's what we want to avoid.
And linked to that, and thank you for that response, is a question which is asking your thoughts on universal basic income in New Zealand. So should there be a universal basic income to ensure that people don't get left behind in the recovery phase? So as you say, to avoid that inequity?
I'm a strong believer in basic income. In other words, no one in New Zealand or in any country that can afford it should have people that die of starvation, that are homeless, that cannot afford to live. And therefore, a basic level of income is something I believe very strongly in, as well as a basic delivery of public services like health, like education, like basic infrastructure, including digital connectivity, by the way. However, I do not believe in the universal word that goes before it, because that is, in my view, a problem for at least 4 reasons. The first is, if everyone gets the same amount of income from the government, those that deserve it most get less than they would have got. The 20% or 30% of the population that really need it, their amount gets diluted out. And actually, the OECD has shown that the universal leads to higher levels of poverty as a result, less targeted and directed support for people in need, whether it's child support, unemployment support, disability support, housing support, whatever the support is. So you give it to everyone, those that need it get less. That's the first reason. And the arithmetic just doesn't work to give everyone a lot more. Then you end up, and I've done the numbers, I haven't done them for New Zealand, but I've done them for the UK, it'd basically be 3/4 of the budget would go to UBI if you gave a living wage to everyone. The second reason I don't like it is because I believe that people get meaning, get networks, get skills out of work. And that the idea behind UBI is they basically pay people to stay at home, not to work. And I think that's extremely dangerous for societies. When you look at places where this has happened, like in the Midwest of the US, you get what the Nobel Prize winner Angus Deaton calls the diseases of despair. Suicide, depression, divorce, drugs. People, I believe, want to work and want to contribute. And the idea that you get a hand down rather than a hand up, I think is a very dangerous idea. The third reason I don't like it is because the politics of sort of, interesting enough, tends to be the left and right extremes that support UBI. The politics is that we somehow going to use this as a way of solving a fundamental problem, which is what are people going to do that's meaningful in the future of work? I think we need to answer that question. Should we have shorter working weeks? Should we have longer holidays? Should we reskill people? Should we pay for things that aren't being paid for at the moment, like care work, a lot of household work, a lot of other things? Let's have a fundamental conversation about work in the future and what is rewarded and how it's rewarded. And the problem with UBI, in my view, it's like a sticking plaster that gets put over this festering sore about how work is being restructured down to what we need to get down to, which is let's think about the future of work and how everyone in our societies can thrive rather than just giving them money.
Great answer to that. And I guess linked to that question is another one coming through, which is, and you in your presentation basically identified that COVID is an opportunity that we shouldn't waste. But how do we ensure that we don't waste some of the learnings and the opportunities and really challenge ourselves to do things in a different way?
No, I just finished this book called Rescue about COVID and the way to think about it. And what I go into in the book is the difference between the First and Second World War. And the question we need to ask ourselves is, which war are we in? We're definitely in a war, in a crisis. And I think more people will die from COVID and the spillovers, hunger, poverty, and so on, than died in the Second World War. And the thing about the Second World War is because people recognize that unless you do things very differently, it's a repeat cycle. You'll just have more wars and you'll have more death. We have to do things differently. We have to stop pandemics, and we can stop pandemics. We have to stop climate change. We have to deal with these major crises. And during the Second World War, the wisdom not only of Churchill and Roosevelt to create a welfare state, Woods Institution, the Marshall Plan, not to get into the blame game, not to raise global tensions, but it was also the people demanded it. Churchill was kicked out of office 6 weeks after he won the Second World War by an unknown guy, Clem Attlee, in a landslide victory for Labour Party in the UK, because Churchill was not prepared to embrace the welfare state. He wasn't prepared to really digest the full lessons of the war in that respect. And so I think that's the question is, do we really take away from this? This is the pandemic to end all pandemics. What are we going to do about it? Do we take away from it that we've learned how to value essential workers? Do we just clap for them, or do we actually reward them and skill them and protect them properly? Do we learn from it that we absolutely depend on our infrastructure and that let's reinforce it and build it? Do we learn that globalization creates crises as well as opportunities, and we have to manage this butterfly defect of globalization? That's the phase we're in now. I'd say the jury's out. COP was a big, big test. I'm not that happy with the outcome. I don't think people have really digested the scale of change required.
And actually, that's a great segue into possibly our penultimate question, which is, did COP again fail us?
COP was remarkable because, there's an absolute consensus on the science now. There's an absolute consensus on the need to get to net zero. There was, for the first time ever, a proper explicit recognition that coal is at the heart of the challenge. But it did fail us because there weren't binding commitments which were sufficient in scale to get us to what was meant to happen, 1.5 degree or even 2. The estimates are that if we only went by what was committed, firmly committed, we'd be at over 2% increase in temperatures. And these averages are very beguiling because you think 2 degrees ain't much, but it's the extremes around this range which really will kill people and lead to rising oceans and everything else. So no, we now got to hope that it's going to happen in Egypt next year. And we've got to hope that countries go beyond their commitments. And we've also got to hope that they vote for leaders where they can vote that are going to be more serious. But just one statistic which scared me that I learned yesterday is that China's just hit peak coal production. In one day, it's producing more carbon emissions than I think New Zealand produces in a year. So these big countries and what they do really matter.
Absolutely, thank you for that. And just looking, conscious of time, but also perhaps the final question. What could New Zealand learn from overseas in terms of the economic recovery that will be required as we learn to live with COVID in the community?
I think the first thing which I've already mentioned is investment. There's no substitute in investing in infrastructure. That's what builds resilience, but not only infrastructure, spare capacity. You know, it's shocking that hospitals don't have enough PPE equipment. We know they need it. It's shocking that there's this just-in-time working assets tied up or working assets wasted mentality, even around vital public resources like ambulances or hospitals, etc. We need to build resilience into our systems, and that requires investment. There is no substitute for it. Of course, investment which is forward-looking, that's envisaging a zero-carbon economy, that's envisaging a more services-oriented economy, that's envisaging the threat that extreme weather will bring to communities around the world, but in New Zealand. That's my sense of what the big takeaway is. We've learned what to value, we've learned how fragile it is, and let's not make mistakes twice.
Ian, thank you very much. I sense that we could probably go on for the whole of the 4 days talking to you. A very, very insightful presentation that took us through some of the challenges that we do face in that post-COVID recovery, but also some very clear lessons and messages for us around investment. And investment, again, probably what I took out particularly, not just for consumption, but to stimulate the economy. It is an investment in infrastructure. Thank you very much for persevering with the technical issues.
Well, thank you for your patience.
That we experienced, but we did think we would have a couple of technical issues. So thank you very much for your time and very much appreciated.
Yeah.
Stay
Good day
safe.
to you. Yeah, cheers. Bye.
Bye. Okay, so we are just getting ourselves ready for our next speaker. Thank you. My very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who effectively needs no introduction to the infrastructure sector, as our Deputy Prime Minister is a familiar face to all of us, but some background by way of introduction. So Grant joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade in 1997, where he managed the New Zealand Overseas Aid Programme in Samoa. He was then posted to the UN in New York, working on global environmental and development issues. On his return to New Zealand, Grant became an advisor to the former Prime Minister Helen Clark. His belief in social justice and a desire to see every New Zealander achieve their potential led him into politics, and he has been a Member of Parliament for Wellington Central since November 2008. In opposition, Grant held a range of portfolios, including finance from 2014 to 2017, and after the 2017 election, Grant was appointed Minister of Finance, Minister for Sport and Recreation, Associate Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage, and after the 2020 election, Grant became Deputy Prime Minister and retained Finance, Sport and Recreation portfolios. He was also appointed Minister for Infrastructure and Minister for Racing. So Minister, I don't know, as part of your presentation whether you might cover off, could we have a ministry for really fast infrastructure? Over to you, Minister.
Tēnā koe, Margaret, ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Greetings, everybody. Look, I think that's what all agencies have to work towards. I wouldn't want to put faster infrastructure onto any single government agency or indeed any of the participants today. Look, thanks very much for inviting me along again to speak to the Building Nations Conference. Every year we innovate and have different formats, and so it's a pleasure to be speaking to you via this particular format, and let's hope in the near future we'll all be meeting in person for these kinds of conferences. I'm wearing a number of hats, as has already been indicated, and I feel like I should sort of physically change hats at given moments in my speech to let you know which one I'm using. But what I've been asked to speak on today is the broader fiscal situation, clearly as Finance Minister, issues around climate change, and I'll come back to the way that was described in the request to speak, which I think speaks a little to a change of mindset that we need when we're talking about climate change. And then thirdly, and really almost by way of introduction, to speak about Te Waihanga, the Infrastructure Commission's 30-year strategy. The first thing I want to do, though, is thank everybody in the broader infrastructure sector. Everybody knows that the last 20 months in New Zealand and around the world have been incredibly difficult, and a lot of the heavy lifting, literally, by this sector. New Zealand's well-being throughout the last 2 years has actually, in terms of the surveys we do of people, has actually improved. And part of that is because we have been able to operate as a country through this period of time whilst minimising the effects of COVID-19 on our population. And it is well worth pausing as we go through and talk about the issues that are in front of the sector today, to have a think about the fact that New Zealand today sits with one of the lowest mortality rates in the world from COVID-19, some of the lowest hospitalisation rates as well. And while we have had an extended period with particularly Auckland with alert level 3 restrictions, if we look across the whole pandemic, our economic output has remained strong. And so that's a result of the hard work of everybody in New Zealand, but I particularly want to acknowledge the infrastructure sector today. Throughout the period, we've largely been able to have construction and infrastructure work continue, because at level 3 and below, we have the sector operating, albeit with some restrictions. That's meant that there's been a continuing output. Buildings are being built, roads are being developed, public transport networks are being developed, and we've been able to continue to keep people in work within the sector as well. So again, thank you to the sector for adjusting and adapting through those periods of change. I know that in the sector today, there are 3 particular issues that are on people's minds: skills shortages, supply chain restrictions, and the resulting material and labour cost increases. I want you to know that the government is committed to supporting the construction sector to continue to build the houses, buildings and infrastructure that New Zealanders need. And on that note, we're very proud that as a government we've been building more houses than any government since the 1970s, and September's figures show that the annual building consents are at a record high for the 7th month in a row. But there is no doubt that COVID-19 and increased global demand have affected supply chains, and they are driving up costs, particularly for New Zealand as a relatively small market. Research that's been commissioned by the Construction Sector Accord has helped the government understand these supply chain challenges that are facing the sector. And key government actions to reduce the impact of the supply chain have been led by the Ministry of Transport and an inter-agency forum. And I want to thank some of the big players, particularly in the sector, who've worked with us as we've tried to work across government agencies on addressing supply chain issues. The Infrastructure Commission is also using its pipeline to better support coordination of skills and supplies. MB is currently working on its guidance for building product substitution to help educate the sector where there are supply chain issues. But I do want to note that there are no quick fixes when it comes to these supply chain issues. And as you just heard from Ian, the ongoing pandemic means that these issues will be with us for some time. Global freight issues are complex, and as I said earlier, global demand for raw materials and products, particularly timber and timber products, will remain high. New Zealand's geographical distance from market is causing us significant issues, but we continue to work with all in the sector around particularly making sure that shipping lines continue to come to New Zealand, and that at the ports we are doing our very best to make sure that we aren't contributing to supply chain issues. I do note that there were some significant concerns around a couple of ports in particular, but we believe that those have largely been resolved now. And so at a domestic end, we are doing what we can to address these issues. Obviously, during Alert Level 4, we were able to make sure that building material supply issues were dealt with, and we authorised workers around 8 different building product manufacturing and distribution companies in Auckland to resume operation, and that allowed some continuity for the building and construction sector and the rest of the country. And then, as I said, obviously, when we moved to Level 3, we've been able to continue that work. We are going to have to keep an ongoing watch on supply constraints, and we're not going to be regulating retail prices, but we have clearly signalled in our manifesto an intention to take another look at building products in terms of competitive issues, and there'll be more to say about that very soon. I also want to just acknowledge that under alert levels 3 and 4, we have had people moving around the country, and MB, I believe, have done a pretty good job of working with the sector to make sure that people can cross the boundaries as they need to complete urgent building construction and maintenance work. And obviously that boundary has served a great purpose in terms of restricting COVID's movement, and we've done our best to make sure that people can still move to do what they need to do. And then obviously, as everybody knows, we've had the very significant contribution of both the wage subsidy scheme and the resurgence support payment. I would note the construction businesses remain the largest sector recipient of the wage subsidy scheme and the resurgence support payment. Those schemes have been designed to allow people to stay connected to their employer, and across the board we've delivered over $5.5 billion worth of support since the 17th of August on top of what we did in the last outbreak. I also want to make a specific shout out towards the work that we've done around apprenticeships. This has been a really significant part of making sure that the workforce is there, and I think we've really come a long way in terms of the way that we work with the sector on making sure that you have the skilled workforce that you need. But we recognise that immigration restrictions have caused further concerns for people. We do have a group allocation process with spaces for construction workers through until March 2022, when we'll review it, and we continue to try to facilitate people coming in, or indeed staying longer if they have visas that enable them to do that. So overall, it has been a challenging time for the sector, but I think those supply constraints and labour issues we are doing our best to address. And obviously, as we move through the next stages of the pandemic and look to open borders up in the first part of next year, we will hopefully relieve some of those further pressures there as well. If I move to the broader fiscal situation, I do think that New Zealand's response overall has meant that we've come through this in a fairly strong way. When you look at our government accounts through to the end of last year, we've exceeded where we thought we would be. Unemployment is obviously much lower, which in turn creates some labour constraint issues, but I would certainly rather have people in work than not, and having an unemployment rate of 3.4% is something that I think New Zealand can be proud of when we look around the OECD and see the average at around 6%. The strength and resilience of the New Zealand economy has come through in our tax revenue, and we're about $2.3 billion above forecast as a result of the fact that businesses are still working and companies are still making profits. As a result, net core crown debt is 30% of GDP, or $102 billion as at the 30th of June, which is below forecast. We were meant to be at 34%. And obviously, our strong position going in has been very helpful for that. And it is important, even though debt levels are growing and are forecast to grow a little further. Again, as you heard from Ian, the cost of borrowing is in fact as low as it was even when we were had much higher levels. Is much higher. Even though we've got much higher levels of borrowing, the cost of borrowing is still lower than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And just at those overall debt levels, it is worth noting that even though New Zealand's debt is now around 30% and forecast to go to 40%, that still puts us with one of the lower levels of public debt in the world. And using the IMF monitor, which is a consistent one, they have Australia at about 54% in 2025, the UK at 102, and the US at 113, with the average of advanced economies being net debt of 95.4%, compared using their IMF monitor to be 26.5% for New Zealand. So we've come into this in a strong position. We have borrowed significant sums of money to help New Zealand through this, but we retain one of the better debt positions in the world, and as we said, a lower cost of financing than we've seen in the past. In order to be able to work our way through this period of time, we have decided to invest heavily in sectors that will help create jobs, and the construction sector is certainly one of those. During the year that we've just gone through, we had around $9.4 billion of Crown infrastructure spending, and obviously as we look ahead, we've got a 5-year total of more than $50 billion already in train in terms of infrastructure spending. No doubt there have been delays in infrastructure projects as a result of COVID, and the government's not immune to that. But that investment sets us up, I believe, for a very strong development of the sector over the next few years. If I must move to the question of climate change that I've been asked to address, and I heard in the poll that it's sitting at number 2 there, so an important topic for us to talk about. I was asked to talk about the cost of climate change, and at the outset, I want to say that I view this a little bit differently. The cost of doing nothing when it comes to climate change is much, much greater than the fiscal costs we will be facing by investing now and making sure that we reach our climate change targets. And secondly, I think we've got to change our frame of reference here to a much more positive one about the opportunities presented for us to be leaders when it comes to addressing climate change, and particularly the development of clean tech and things that will actually be useful for the rest of the world as well as New Zealand in addressing climate change. So yes, there is a significant fiscal cost associated with meeting our climate change goals, but I believe actually the time has come for New Zealand to embrace the opportunities of the transition to a low carbon economy, and that's what we're focused on in the short term. In terms of how we're getting there, the emissions reductions plans, which I'm sure many of you will have heard about, have been out for consultation, and we will release our final plans by the end of May next year, along with a national adaptation plan in August next year that's going to focus on how we can build climate resilience. Implementing these plans will require fundamental changes to the way our economy works and the way we do things. I also would note that we simply, as a government, cannot meet our climate change goals on our own. We need to, and we are partnering with the private sector to deliver these changes, and our spending is focused on creating both the right policy and regulatory environment to deliver emissions reductions and climate resilience. We will be bringing a climate lens to all of our infrastructure investments going forward, emphasising low emissions development and climate resilient investment, and we will be seeking to partner with people who share those values. Obviously, infrastructure has long-term horizons, and that aligns well with the achievement of our net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But we do need to be ensuring that the true cost of carbon is factored into our public sector infrastructure projects. It's critical as part of this that we decarbonise our energy sector to support the industrial sector to decarbonise. Currently, 30% of our energy we consume is from low emission sources, and we need to increase that to around 85% by 2050. And we'll be doing this by making greater use of biomass and low emission electricity, such as wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal. We are, of course, fortunate that we have abundant sources of low emission electricity, and we need to harness this far more to meet our net zero carbon commitments. Obviously, I also believe that this is linked to a higher wage economy. We know that if we are investing into these areas, these will produce jobs that pay better than the ones that we have seen in a more carbon intensive era. Areas like hydrogen in particular offer us significant ability to invest. And if we want to take one example, you can just look at the data area, with 2 firms announcing in the last year investments in large-scale international data centre in Auckland, and another one with plans for one near Invercargill. Along with this, the Hawaii Submarine Cable Limited Partnership confirmed earlier this month that they will be building a new submarine cable linking Invercargill, Dunedin and Christchurch with Australia, Indonesia, and Angeles. All up, the investments in these new data centres are expected to add more than $10 billion to our GDP over the next 15 years and create more than 1,000 jobs. And experience shows us that we can build the energy, telecommunications and transport infrastructure needed to achieve our net zero carbon goals. For example, relative to the size of our economy, we built electricity generation at a faster pace between 1960 and 1990 than we will actually need over the next 30 years. And now we've got better technology, wind, solar, that'll actually make it easier than building the hydro dams that we built in the 60s and 70s. So we can do this. New Zealanders are good at innovation, and we need to make sure we use every aspect of that. I just want to mention 2 elements of the government's funding strategy around the transition to a low carbon economy. The first is the boost we've given to the New Zealand Green Investment Finance Limited. In the last budget, we added $300 million to the original $100 million establishment capital for NZ GIF, Its job is to partner with the private sector and local government and others to make sure that we are building the long-term infrastructure and developing the new technologies that we need. We've given it an additional boost in funding because we know that those partnerships are critical. And then finally in this section, just to note the statement I made at the budget in May, which is that we will be hypothecating or targeting all of the revenue that we get from the emissions trading scheme into emissions reductions projects. And we'll have more to say about that as we move towards budget 2022. The final mention I wanted to make today, but partly because I've talked about this every single time I've been at a Building Nations conference, and that is around the infrastructure funding and financing legislation that we passed in the last government. And as for those who aren't familiar, this is the framework to allow private capital to support the development of housing and urban development across New Zealand alongside stretched local government balance sheets, of which we know there are many, and also central government. And the current pipeline of transactions under the Infrastructure Financing Act is well progressed, and I just want to give 3 examples so people know what is happening out there. The first of those is the proposed Tauriko West housing development southwest of Tauranga beside State Highway 29. The planned early works package of infrastructure here is going to enable around 2,000 dwellings, and that package includes the early works package includes State Highway 29 upgrades, the spine raid, and the potable and wastewater projects. Those are going to be delivered by the Tauranga City Council, and the roading projects delivered by Waka Kotahi, with the internal infrastructure funded by developers. So that's exactly the kind of partnership that we want. Central government, local government and private developers working together. And I really congratulate everyone involved at Tauriko West for what they've done. Moving to something perhaps a little less glamorous is the Wellington Sludge Minimisation Facility, which while it doesn't sound great, is a fundamental change to how we process sewage down here in the Wellington area. And we've been working with the Wellington City Council on a new facility at Moa Point. It's going to be using thermal and thermal drying technologies to reduce sludge volumes by up to 83%. And that's a partnership agreement with ourselves and the Wellington City Council, facilitated through IFF. And then also back in Tauranga, the Tauranga Transport System Program, which CIP are working on with the Tauranga City Council and Waka Kotahi to build together a range of projects that are in the transport area that are going to support the growth of that region, which we know is absolutely massive. There's around 72 individual transport projects in there, but they, if we do them well, are going to really lead to sustainable urban growth, better public transport and road safety. And we have an IFF solution looking to fund about 10 of those projects in the near term. So I did just want to update people on that. We've talked about this a lot. There is still more opportunity to use the innovative funding and financing tools that are here to link the private sector with local and central government, and I would encourage everybody to continue working on that. And look, finally, before I take some questions, Margaret, just noting the work of the Infrastructure Commission Te Waihanga and their 30-year strategy. I was really thrilled to receive it from them. And I've promised as a Christmas present, by Christmas Eve, I will respond to the Infrastructure Commission on their strategy, and we'll be publishing the final document by March 2022. For those of you who've had a look at it, you'll see that it's a far-reaching and deep document. The draft strategy, however, sounds a warning to New Zealand. If we continue on our current path, we can expect the cost of infrastructure to grow significantly without necessarily meeting all of the needs that New Zealand has, particularly when it comes to population growth and the climate change issues that I've mentioned, and obviously the additional cost pressures we're all facing at the moment. Simply building the infrastructure we need to meet the challenges would mean doubling what we spend to around 9.6% of GDP over a 30-year period. That's $31 billion a year. So we can do some of that, and we will keep continuing to increase our investment, but we have to do better than that as well. We need to be smarter about how we plan, deliver, and use our infrastructure. And this means getting more from the infrastructure that we build, reducing costs and prioritizing for the greatest impact. And the draft strategy offers a number of actions for this. There's 67 recommendations in total, which you'll be pleased to know I won't go through now, but they are focused on 5 objectives, which I think are really useful ones for us to rally around. The first of those is the enabling of a net zero emissions Aotearoa New Zealand through all of the means that I've just mentioned before. Secondly, a real focus on supporting towns and regions to flourish by making sure that they have safe and reliable infrastructure and that we use technology to do that. Thirdly, to build attractive and inclusive cities. We can do a lot better, and the government's recent announcement around working with the opposition around the National Policy Statement on Urban Development to fast-track intensification is important. We need to be making sure that as we build and develop our urban centres, we do so looking at everything from educational facilities to green space to make sure that we are enabling our cities to be inclusive of everybody, regardless of income, age, ethnicity or disability. Fourthly, strengthening resilience to shocks and stresses. Our infrastructure must be able to handle New Zealand's fragile environment when it comes to things like earthquakes and also climate change. And there's a vitally important role for all of us in making that work. And fifthly, I thought the infrastructure strategy was incredibly interesting by its push for a move to a circular economy, setting a national direction on waste, which the government has done through its waste strategy, and managing pressure on waste infrastructure to use waste to generate energy. So while Te Waihinga is an autonomous Crown entity and it owns the strategy, I am responsible for leading our response to it, and I'm consulting broadly with my colleagues, but I do believe it is an important document for New Zealand to be able to move forward from. There is a number of other pieces of work that the Infrastructure Commission is doing, but I know that they're also talking during the conference, so I won't go any further into that. So if I can just conclude, Margaret, by thanking the industry again and all of the organisations for your work, thanking you for your contribution both to the infrastructure strategy, but also to the emissions reductions plans and the work on those. I do strongly believe that working together, New Zealand is going to be able to address the long-term infrastructure deficit that New Zealand has. We will do this because the government is committed with our $57 billion over the next 5 years. We'll do this because we have greater certainty now of our plan and our strategy through the work of the Infrastructure Commission. And we will also do this if we can retain a commitment to partnership between government, local government, iwi and the private sector. We have the skills, we have the talent, we have the resources. We now simply have to bring it all together. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Minister, for that. I've got a lot of questions coming in, and I guess you're used to people asking you what you're going to do, but perhaps I could start by just asking, what would you like the sector to do? What can the sector do to actually help deliver these objectives?
I think two or three things come quickly to mind. The first of those is really to pick up the climate change challenge. And rather than resist it or see it as a burden, see it as the opportunity that I believe it is for us to be the developers of technology, the makers, not the takers, when it comes to the way that develops, and to work with us on the best ways of measurement of whether or not we're actually doing what we say we're doing, to make sure we get past allegations of greenwashing so that actually these are really substantive changes to the way we go about our work. So that would be the first thing I would say that the sector can really help with. The second is to take up those opportunities for partnership with local government and central government. I am often told that the world is awash with capital, and that's great. What we've got to do is make sure that capital finds its way to the kinds of infrastructure investments that we need, and they do need to be sustainable ones. And so I'd ask people to have as broad a horizon as possible. And then thirdly, and this might sound like a strange thing to say, I think thirdly, we've also got to recognise that the constraints of COVID-19 mean that not everything is going to happen as quickly or as straightforwardly in 2018. And even back then, people were concerned about the way that a number of aspects of happening. But I just think it's just a comment Ian made in that earlier session that was ringing in my ears, which is that we are going to be living with COVID-19 for some time. And I think we have to adjust one or two expectations, acknowledge that things might not move forward in a linear way, that we might have to occasionally pause, move to the left, move to the right to get ourselves through. And I just ask for everyone's cooperation. New Zealanders have been amazing over the last 20 months and the way in which they have got on board. But it's just a kind of a recognition that we're going to keep trying to move forward together, but there are still going to be restrictions on us, be they supply chain constraints or be they things more directly to do with the virus. So I just really welcome that cooperation that we've had and look forward to seeing more of it. And now you can get on to all the questions about what I'm going to do.
Oh, great. Well, actually, with your last comment, I'm reminded of a phrase that's often quoted, that the road to excellence is always under construction. I think we should remember that.
Like every road I've found.
Exactly. So let's move on to some of those questions, kicking off with one that, what about investment in infrastructure in the regions that most need it, where there is high deprivation and significant underinvestment year after year by numerous governments? So what's your thoughts on how that would be addressed?
Yeah, look, I think in fairness, that's what motivated a big part of the work we did last term on the Provincial Growth Fund. The reason we actually had 5 surge regions when we were putting all of that together was because we recognised that there were regions, likes of the far north, Tairāwhiti, the west coast of the South Island, where we actually haven't invested significantly in over successive governments. So we targeted that investment. And the good news is that that is still rolling out, and there's a significant amount of infrastructure spend within that. In terms of this government, we've now got and Minister Nash, I know, is with you later on, we've now got a regional growth partnership that we're working on, where we're looking to be as strategic as possible with the kinds of investments that the government does to get alongside regions. And obviously within the transport budget, we already have a significant focus on support for roading and other transport links across the region. So we've recognised that we have allowed some regions' infrastructure to slip further back. I hesitate to say the phrase 3 waters this early in such a friendly conversation, but clearly in the area of 3 waters, we would regard that as an area where, particularly in the regions of New Zealand, we've seen significant underinvestment. And the whole point of the creation of the new water service entities that we're looking at is to aggregate up so that some of those smaller regions can get the investment that they need, that a local council is unable to provide on their own. So, we can work together in partnership to address those issues, but we're acutely aware of the regions where we've seen underinvestment.
Thank you. Sort of building on that and your comments earlier about the strength of the economy and the recovery, that we've got low unemployment and early signs of inflation. Do you have any concerns about what that might do to our future economic recovery and growth?
Yeah, look, the whole world is keeping an eye on inflation again, as you heard from Ian and his comments. From a New Zealand perspective, yes, we've seen a spike in inflation, but it is very much in line with global trends. And so the focus we've got on is, what does the global economy look like in terms of driving up some of the prices that affect New Zealand? The advice I'm getting from a range of different sources is that there's a difference between what's called whether something is temporary or something is persistent. And while we are going to have higher rates of inflation for a period of time, the major advice I've got is that this will wash out. Treasury, the Reserve Bank and others still say that if you look at our 4-year forecast period, we'll be back down to rates within the 1 to 3% band that we charge the Reserve Bank with looking out for. But there are certainly risks to us, and we've been monitoring that carefully. Those supply constraints are obviously supporting that, so we're supporting inflation growth, so we're trying to work on those, and we'll be careful with our spending, but equally we don't want to walk away from building houses, because we need to build more houses. And so it's a very delicate and careful balance to make sure that we don't exacerbate those inflationary pressures, but that we do the right thing by New Zealanders. And just to bear in mind, in our system, the Reserve Bank is where that sits. Their core mandate is around price stability, around managing inflation. They have the tools to do that. And so obviously people will be focused on the way that they approach it. From a fiscal end, we'll try to strike a good balance, being careful with our spending, but investing where we need to.
Great, thank you. A common theme that often comes up is the lack of certainty in the pipeline. So we can put everything in place, but dare I say it, because a lot of the major decisions are reliant on political decisions, that they can be diverted onto other more important political outcomes. So how do you think we could use the infrastructure plan to actually give us that greater certainty over a longer horizon without the political interference, if I may be so bold?
Yeah, look, I mean, this has been a persistent call for many, many years from the sector, and it's the reason why we established the commission, so that we do have a clarity of the pipeline. It's the reason why we've got an infrastructure strategy, and my goal is that that will be the document, or those will be the documents that do provide certainty for people. We made a subtle but important change when I became the finance minister, which was to move from single-year capital budgets to multi-year capital budgets in the government's budget. And that's allowed us to give more certainty in sectors like education and health around the pipeline of work there. I want to see that become a feature of what we do, where we have more multi-year funding paths so that people can plan more accurately there. We obviously try to do that in the transport area as well. I think there's still a bit of residual concern from people from what happened when we had the change of government, and we did alter the focus in some areas, for instance, to see a bit more in the public transport area. But I feel now we've got pretty settled strategies in all of the major parts of government expenditure, and they are feeding in to that infrastructure strategy. So my goal is that we get that as clear and as consistent as we can. Ultimately, politics is still politics. Different governments will be voted in, and they will have different priorities from time to time. But this is one of the reasons why we've tried to make, for example, the climate change area as cross-party as possible. And we did have broad support for the Zero Carbon Act, and we're hoping to achieve similarly with the work we're doing on the emissions reduction plans.
And you mentioned earlier we've carried out our first survey, and it came up with our three key priorities. You've touched on climate change. We've touched a little bit on attracting talent and capacity into the sector. And the other, of course, is the infrastructure deficit, which again, you've touched a little bit on in terms of some of the options to address that. But given the scale and quantum, do you think we should be given some further consideration to greater PPPs, or, as Ian talked about, investment, for example, from pension funds into some of those longer term infrastructure projects?
Yeah, look, I guess, from our perspective, that's why we passed the Infrastructure Funding and Financing Act, was to open up more opportunities for the private sector investment. And we do know that, we have an increasing pool of KiwiSaver funds in New Zealand. We've got an increasing sized New Zealand Super Fund. Both of those have got critical roles to play in the way in which infrastructure will develop in New Zealand, in my view. And the answer for us is to package up investable options. And that's what we've been trying to do. And I gave a couple of examples of that today. And there's heaps more potential for that between local government and central government to create those investable projects, which the likes of pension funds and others will work on. When it comes to PPPs, I do, and I've said this before at the conference, I do have some weariness around that. And I sit here in Wellington, not too far from Transmission Gully, and all that has brought us. And so there is a lot of lessons to learn about how to best do those kinds of projects, and make sure that we don't repeat mistakes of the past, particularly in that transport area. But obviously in the core areas of government and health, education, corrections, we've got a position that the government will build those facilities, but we'll clearly have to do that in partnership with the private sector in terms of the development and the actual building of them. Can I just pick up one thing, Margaret, just noting that I've got a caucus meeting in 7 minutes, so we'll have to wind up shortly. Can I just pick up one of the other topics of those three that you mentioned, which is around skills? And I do just want to go back to the point that, yes, I get the fact that there is a number of people with specialist skills who we do need to see brought into New Zealand, and we've tried to facilitate that through COVID. And as we move to the next stages of our Reconnecting New Zealanders plan, we will be able to do more of that. But we fundamentally have to continue to do a better job of training the people who are here. And that's where I feel the work we've done on apprenticeships has worked really well. More than 170,000 people have taken up our free apprenticeships and targeted trade training system. Within that, in the construction sector, we've seen an enormous boost in the number of people there, and we've supported people to keep their apprentices on. And can I just urge people to keep investing in that next generation? The construction sector accord's been an amazing development in that regard. Much more clarity around where construction needs are and how we can reach into a new generation of people to work in the sector. So yes, we'll continue to support people bringing in those who are needed, but I really want us to make sure that we build on the success of the Apprenticeship Boost program and the free apprenticeships to really create that next generation of workers within our construction sector.
Great. Now, just conscious of your time, do you have time for a couple of cheeky questions at the end?
A couple more? Yep, absolutely.
Couple more. One is, in the context of RMA reforms and the pressures on local government, what weight does government give to local spatial planning and placemaking?
Huge. And in fact, one of the things about the way we're looking at things like the Three Waters reforms, the RMA reforms, is actually to facilitate councils being able to focus more on placemaking and being able to be, critical drivers of the way in which the areas that they look after feel, look, and develop. And so, we continue. The reason we're doing the overall local government review is to support the sector to be able to see what the future looks like. So yes, we're proposing aggregation around water. Yes, there are going to be some changes in the RMA process that might see a bit more of a regional look, but that doesn't mean local government's not important anymore, far from it. But it is about us helping the sector to refocus. So placemaking is so important. I've seen such good examples of it as I've gone around New Zealand, different councils who've got a really clear view of the kind of lives they want their people to live and the services and the infrastructure that has to support that. So very much see that place, recognise it's a little bit of a time of transition, and we have to keep working with the sector, even if we might hold different views on some aspects of those changes.
Minister, I have so many more questions. I'm going to take one more because I know your time is very valuable, and it will be interesting to get your views. Will the light rail project ever get off do you believe it will progress, and by when?
I do. I really do. And I think it's really important that it does. For me, I presume we're talking about Auckland here. Wellington's got its own version of that as well. But in terms of Auckland, I think it's really important that we continue to develop a transport network in Auckland. One of the issues we've had over the years is that people keep believing that there's a silver bullet to kind of solve Auckland's transport needs. There isn't. There's a connection of different modes of transport working together. But we do believe that the light rail project's an important part of that. Michael Wood has pushed that along over the last few months. People will have seen the report of the independent report on that most recently. Government is going to respond to that rapidly, and you'll see where we land in terms of how to take the project forward. Like all major infrastructure projects, it's got a long timeline for sure, but people will see that progress, and we'd like to see work start as soon as possible. So watch the space for a pretty rapid response from the government to the independent report that we've just received.
Minister, thank you for your time. I know you've got to get off to caucus. I really do appreciate you engaging with us in this virtual platform. As you say, hopefully next year we'll all be able to meet in person. But I've noted down the challenges that you've given to the sector, and no doubt they will be featuring as we work our way through the rest of our 4 days. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Margaret.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm just going to pull together the closing remarks from the end of our first session. And I guess very common themes coming through from all of our speakers, that we need to future-proof the infrastructure, but we need to do things differently. And Minister Robertson talked about, let's grasp the opportunities that climate change presents to us, as opposed to trying to greenwash our way out of these things. That we need to focus on investment, but investment that is future-proofed and investment that will deliver resilience, but not just resilience, but also capacity and capability. And that resilience, we heard from Ian, there's no substitute for it. And I guess when we look at our infrastructure deficit and we reflect on the fact that the last time we probably had such a massive investment in infrastructure was back in the 40s and 50s, that we do need to actually look at future-proofing and building that headroom that Ian referred to in the infrastructure. But equally, that we do need to do things differently. we can't just keep repeating and doing the same things. So challenging ourselves to look at what is the best and what is the most appropriate, good at it. So we should believe in ourselves in terms of the ability to deliver. We talked about our 3 priorities at the moment, and interestingly, they feature very prominently with the Minister, which is the infrastructure deficit, climate change, and attracting and retaining skills. So again, I think we'll come back to those through our various presentations throughout the rest of our 4 days. Thank you all for your attendance at this morning's opening ceremony. Thank you to ANZ as the session sponsor and indeed our premier sponsor. This afternoon, we will deal with the economic environment and impacts that we need to look at in terms of delivering infrastructure fit for purpose and fit for the future. Just to remind you that the content will be available on demand 24 hours after these sessions. We're going to take a break now, and we'll be back at 10:20 with Professor Susie Wiles, who will be presenting to us and also have the opportunity for Q&A, and that session will be facilitated by Graham Mitchell. So once again, thank you for your attendance, thank you for your participation. Apologies I didn't get to everybody's questions, but I think we would have had both of our presenters locked in for the rest of our 4 days. But thank you for that level of engagement, and look forward to seeing you later on in the day. Mā te wai.